Joe Gable. My hands are clean. I just washed them. That's why they're red.
I didn't even notice it.
Good morning. Yeah, I was just trying to get people's attention here. I'm going to call to order the meeting of the Finance and Operations Committee of the University's Board of Regents. I see our colleagues assembling here, and good morning, everyone. We have lots of business to do today, and as I was on the phone at the September meeting listening to all this, I heard Regent Anderson repeatedly say, "We have a bus to catch, we have a bus to catch." Well, the same situation exists today. We have a bus to catch at 5 minutes to 12, so you may see me being a little bit of a disciplinarian here with the timing, but we got lots of things to talk about, a lot of consequential matters. So if you see me moving along, it's because we need to get a bunch done in a relatively short period of time. So let's jump in with our first item today. This is an action item that follows up on review and discussion from the September meeting, the President's 2019 six-year capital plan, and the 2020 state capital request, and we're currently set up to do those. We'll talk about them together, further Regent discussion this morning, but we would take each of those in a separate resolution. So, should I start with President Gable, or very good, President Gable, good morning.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a very quick reminder for the benefit of those taking these matters into consideration that when this was presented at the September board meeting, it was part of a discussion of the transition and an ongoing conversation about our capital and facilities and what our strategy should be going forward. This presentation in September and what you have before you today is a reflection of that conversation, and I know some discussion in between that hopefully resolved questions or concerns, although we certainly look forward to additional discussion today if there is any. But I did want to state that our long-term capital plan really is a physical way of reflecting some of the values of the institution, that the campus's beauty really resides in the character of its buildings, and that's what we're trying to capture, preserving its history while also striving to support and advance our future aspirations in teaching and research. So you'll see before you efforts to keep the infrastructure in its best possible state, and also needs to invest ourselves and seek investment in space for classroom instruction, research, growth, et cetera. We do our best to project. We have really qualified people who do that, but projections are just projections. So you see some opportunistic activity there as well as things come up, both that emerged since July 1st when I came on board and some that are carryovers from the previous administration that we also look forward to discussing. But I just wanted to remind everyone of the perspective of where we are in the conversation before Vice President Burnett makes his presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, President Gable. Senior Vice President Burnett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the board. I'm going to turn this short presentation over to Vice President Mike Bertelsen to walk through. Nothing's changed since we presented this to you at the last meeting, and we'll summarize here for you, with your permission.
Very good. Vice President Bertelsen, proceed.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Regents. The plan priorities, I won't read them to you. They're the same as they were before. We would like to remind ourselves what those are. The state capital requests are the same. All the numbers are exactly the same. The only note I would point out to you is the clinical research facility is specified as the name. Before we'd changed the name from Health Science Investment Program to specifically the clinical research facility. This was always intended to be the first project out of that broader plan, and is the cornerstone and critical path for that, and that was really the focus point for that effort anyway. We wanted to clarify, that helps clarify our messaging, so it really doesn't change in content, but it does clarify that project. And then the resolution. So we are glad to take any questions you may have.
Very good. Board questions for the management team. I see no one interested in a question. I'd gladly entertain a motion to proceed on the resolution.
So moved.
So moved and seconded. I'll ask again for questions of the leadership team. Yes, Regent Chu.
So we got some information about the projects that are no longer on the list, and I was wondering if you could explain that. I don't know if everybody got that information. I was wondering if maybe we could have an explanation of the projects that are no longer on the list.
Vice President Bertelson, is the question clear?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I will remember part of the memo, and I'll call for help
This
if I
one?
need it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you may have more information in front of you than I remember off the top of my head, but the one change in the 6-year capital plan that I know that had brought some attention is we had, historically, we had specifically called out the Armory in the 2022 request as a potential project. In this version, we referred to it as the East Bank Capital Renewal. It's the same dollar amount being held in the same year. And the reasoning for that was kind of twofold. One, we know that area between the 10 church is currently vacant as well. And we also know there's significant challenges in front of us for the Armory. So it very well could be that project. We are going to be doing some small area planning for that set of buildings to better understand what programs make sense in that space collectively, and just imagine that they may be planned collectively what makes sense for that district, and didn't want to prejudge which one might come first versus second, and also knowing that with new leadership for the university, we want to give some flexibility for the president to understand the projects and give us some feedback and be part of that decision making. That's the primary change. We can talk to others if you'd like.
Thank you. Follow up, Regent Chu.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. Yeah, that's the one I'm interested in. So basically, you're saying it's still on there for 2022, but it's grouped with a bunch of other stuff now, and I'm just kind of wondering how often that.
Vice President Bertelson.
Mr. Chair and Regent Chu, so the broad question you would ask is how often we make changes. I'd say we seldom make, we have been remarkably, I'd say, consistent in the planning process for a 6-year plan. There are occasionally changes, and this is particular one. We kept the same dollar amount in the same year, but we opened up the flexibility effectively to say we wanted to consider whether that is the Armory for sure, or whether that might be part of the old bell, now referred to as 10 Church, whether that project also needs some attention. So we wanted to give the president some flexibility to confirm whether that Armory is indeed that right project in that year or not.
Regent Chu, one more follow-up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, the only reason I ask is because in the past I would ask, where's the Armory project? And I was told, oh, it's on the list, it's 2022. But now it's not really on the list, and you've kind of commingled it with another project that should be kind of its own project, I would think, since it's its own building. 10 churches across the street. So, I mean, unless you're planning on taking out the street and building one big building, I'm not sure exactly what's going on here.
Mr. Chair, Regent Chu, I think we effectively, you're right, they would be two separate projects. And what we're saying is we don't know which one would make sense to go first at this particular moment.
Okay.
Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess kind of going to that point, without debating the merits of the Armory, and we've had that conversation at this board, and there's been in the past strong support for bringing it up to speed. And I know some members recently had a chance to walk through and see the significant need in that facility. I want to just caution for the future that this, which you just described, and I guess I hadn't picked it up when I was reviewing the materials, will somewhat defeat the purpose of a 6-year plan before this board, because ultimately we could just simply call it the East Bank or the Twin Cities campus plan and have a lot of flexibility within that plan, that actually identifying the specific facilities for which these requests are made is what is to be brought before this board. So I understand the motivation behind it. I think I share maybe with a bit finer point than my colleague just raised, but we have been continuing to follow through with an expectation that this is something we pursue with that facility, that specific facility. I would also note, and this again predates our president's tenure here, but we had also been provided information about what would be happening with Bell based on the move of the museum. And so I'm a little bit surprised that we don't have a little bit more clarity on where we're going with that facility. So with those caveats, I would just say that I would hope that this is not a trend of moving projects into groups and then allowing for, flexibility, I think was the term you used, because then there's really no point to bring it before this board for approval. So I would hope that we would continue to go to the names of the facilities and the type of project that we're seeking approval on. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Rocha. I'm sure President Gable and the team are listening and understand the board's concern about specificity here. So with that, I'm going to call for a vote on the 6-year capital plan. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Very good. That takes us to the 2020 state capital request, which is obviously part and parcel of that, but I'd like to entertain a motion to consider that and then open it up for questions as well. Is there a motion in support?
So moved.
Good. Is there a second?
Second.
Very good. It's moved and seconded. The 2020 capital request to the state is before us now. Is that the motion in front of us? Let's see. Yep, that is. So questions and comments about that. I'll open with one. And while analogies are always, dangerous, as I look at the chemistry building project and read the detail in that, just from a conceptual standpoint, should we be thinking about that as something akin to the Tate renovation? I mean, that's what it looks and feels like, and I'm not trying to draw numerical comparisons, but it's a pretty significant and comprehensive overhaul of a core building on the campus. Is that how we should think about it in terms of what it entails?
Mr. Chair and Regents, I would say yes, generally, though the ratios of what's renovated versus what's new is different. Both of them have a renovation component and a new component. Tate was, the majority was renovation with a smaller addition. Fraser, what currently Fraser and historically was the law school, the central core will be retained, and that's a smaller share, and you'll see the later wings that were built on would be taken down, and a much larger chemistry teaching labs would be built. So the administrative office meeting spaces will be used in the existing space, but as you can imagine, modern chemistry teaching labs won't work with those existing spaces, and the wings really are not part of the core historical nature of that building. So the ratio is much more about new, modern teaching chemistry, but we will be retaining the existing sort of historic core of Fraser as part of that building as well.
Very good. And a quick follow-up. I know you've had some engagement with legislators in terms of tours. Anything you want to share with the board about how things were received? Have you had them through this facility?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair and Regents, and Regent Chu joined us on this last week on a tour with some senators. We still have several more to go yet, but we're very enthusiastic on our side, and they seem to be receptive to the messaging as well.
All right, open it up for Regent Swigum.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mike, just a word of advice, humble advice to you and to Matt Kramer and his team. As we approach the legislature, I believe the $200 million HEPA request needs to be our top priority. It has to be. We need to focus in on that, make sure that we don't fall off that top priority request. But as we approach the legislature, I would encourage you to make sure that when you come forward to them, you break up that $200 million into how much will be done at Rosemont, how much at Rochester, how much at UMD, Morris, and Crookston, because the legislature will look at balancing the final amount between outstate Greater Minnesota and metro area, and I don't want all 200 million or 150 or 120, whatever we get, maybe 300. I don't want it racked up to just the metro area or to this campus, because some of it's Crookston, some of it's Duluth, and make sure you approach them with that knowledge.
Yes, Mr. Chair and Regent Swigum, we've articulated that, and I know that U Relations has made sure that, and working with the chancellors, that as they visited those campuses, that's a key part of their their trip to those campuses as well. And we will, we have our list broken out that way, and we will make sure to make that point.
Other questions for the administration? Regent Hsu.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair McMillan. I was on the tour. I think it was with Senators Anderson and Isaacson, and they were both, I think, happy with the amount that we're talking about and the projects. I think we really could see the need for the chemistry building and the what's it called? The
Institute for Child Development.
IDC. And I think they were favorably inclined to kind of support what we're looking for. There is the question, one of the big questions that Senator Isaacson was asking was, does this keep us moving ahead? Are we falling behind, or are we kind of catching up, basically, was the question. And I think Mike could, or Vice President Bertelsen can give you a better idea of kind of what he took away from that. But I think that it looks like from the presentation that I saw that we are maybe just barely keeping up. We're not getting ahead. And I think with the $200 million of HEAPR, obviously when we have a need that, I think the need that you presented was over $4 billion total.
Correct.
And so that was a little bit of a shock to them. I think they came in thinking it was like 2.5 or something, or 2 billion. And so right away it looks like we're falling behind even further. But I think it's a good number.
Well, thanks for your participation there. Other comments, questions on the 2020 capital request? All right, let's take a vote on that. All in favor of adopting the resolution before you, signify so with a sign of aye. Aye. Opposed? Very good. That carries, and we will move on to the dining contract extension. And I believe Vice President Bertelsen's going to stay put and be joined by Director Karen. And as they're readying materials for our consideration, Senior Vice President Burnett, any opening comments here?
No, I think we've laid this out fairly and pretty extensively over the last few weeks and actually months about this, and it's not an inconsequential issue for this campus, and we understand that. So I'd like Vice President Bertelsen and Director Karen to brief you as you consider this action before you. Thank you.
Yeah, very good. And before we do, I want to note that Vice Chair, Committee Vice Chair Beeson and myself had an excellent meeting yesterday with 4 Student Association leaders. And I think our student representatives of the board will probably have more to share with us, but I want to commend them for a constructive and helpful and thoughtful dialogue that they had with us. And at your place is a resolution that the Student Association just adopted, the Minnesota Student Association, I think, Wednesday night or Tuesday night. So just some added materials there, and we'll wait to hear from our student representatives. But again, I want the committee to know that Regent Beeson and I were asked to sit down with them. We did, and it was a very productive conversation. So thank you for that. With no further commentary from me, Vice President Bertelsen and Director Karen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Regents. This will be very short. Just to remind you the sort of our dining management history of from our time when we self-operated through our first contract and then our second contract in 2008, and now we're at the time figuring out looking toward our future. Our proposed plan forward gives you a sense of a timing and the schedule upon which we would proceed. We're in the this part of the fall. We've identified for feedback from the campus community writ large, and specifically the students as well. We've established and have now, first Student Advisory Committee has now met. We're working on now instituting a series of listening sessions, focus groups, and surveys. That will turn into an RFP process that we put out. Meanwhile, we'll of course be doing self-analysis of what a business plan to self-operate would look like, and then we'll be able to compare what contractors outside would do versus what we think our operation would look like, and then be able to make a decision to bring back to you about a year from now. And with that, here's the resolution, and we're glad to take any questions you have.
All right, where should we start? As either of the student Representative King.
Thank you, Regent McMillan, and thank you, presenters, and thank you for the board members. We actually have a statement set up for the Twin Cities already. We would like to thank everybody for this, and each day we have around 10,000 members of the Twin Cities campus community interacting with dining services. Determining the future of the dining services on the Twin Cities campus is a big decision for us financially and also social consequences as well. The decision before the board directly dictates and authorizes the contract, the extension for the next 2 years. The students do believe that this is the best way to do it, but it's also setting up the groundwork for future decisions as well in dining services. We also recognize that the certain students in the meal plan is a big part of the undergrad experience. And we want to make sure that all students are feeling comfortable and meeting the standards that are set before you in the docket that we have already presented with you guys. And then students are wanting to engage with this part as well of the decision making. We already have more than 100 co-sponsors for the docket that we have in front of you. And we believe that the best option moving forward is the 2-year extension, and that is all we have to say at the moment. Thank you.
Good, thank you. I should always start by bringing a resolution before us as I entertain discussion, so sorry I missed that, but Representative King's comments are taken appropriately. So is there a motion to adopt the resolution before us?
So moved.
Very good.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Now we can properly have discussion about it. Let's see, Regent Rocha, or Representative Kahane, make sure I get your last name right. Say it.
No, that's perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Did you have more to add to what Representative King said?
I do.
Please.
Actually, sort of separately from what Representative King had to say, in Council of Graduate Students meetings, we've discussed the contract with Aramark, and it occurs to us that the politics of this decision aren't something that are frequently aired. And in contracting with Aramark, awarding them over $100 million over the next 10 years, we are not only supporting Aramark and their contribution to the University of Minnesota Twin Cities campus, we're supporting their politics and their involvement in systems that we may not have full agreement with, such as their contracting with prison systems. And are we perhaps, by awarding them these contracts, in some way subsidizing their involvement with these systems with which we may not entirely agree? I think it's just, I don't have anything more intelligent than that to say. I just think that it's something worth considering as we move forward in the decision-making process.
Thank you. Regents, Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in reviewing the resolution that was brought to us by the students that was Representative King alluded to, there's one of the therefores provides a request for a voting MSA student representative on the executive committee of the UMNTC Future Campus Dining Task Force. So I'm trying to understand, so that doesn't currently exist. The committee exists, am I correct in that? There is a UMNTC Future Campus Dining Task Force, or is that something that's going to be created?
I think I'll defer to the administration, but my understanding after our visit yesterday was there's an executive committee, there's a management committee, and then there is a student advisory group that will provide input to the management committee, but I would welcome some further clarity around that structure if administration wants to provide some. Senior Vice President Burnett.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and Vice President Bertelsen can weigh in as well, but there is an executive that is the structure we've put forth for the recommendations to flow in that regard. There are 5 senior leaders, myself included, on that executive committee and the provost. That's what the committee that they're referring to and that therefore.
Regent Rocha.
So I'm maybe missed a moment there. So there is or is not a voting student representative?
There is not a voting student representative on the executive or the management committee at this point, and they've asked for that, and they raised that concern with Regent Beeson and I yesterday as well.
If I may, Mr. Chair?
Yes, Regent Beeson, or I'm sorry, Regent Rocha.
I can't carry that much gravity.
He's next on the list. I was thinking ahead, so.
Particularly to the students that I know have put in a tremendous amount of work, and when these types of matters last as many years as this conversation has, the student leaders are at a distinct disadvantage because you graduate and move on, and a new cohort has to come in and pick up the mantle. So I'm highly sensitive to simply running out the clock on the current group. So trying to have fidelity to the conversation, I think, is important. But I've thought, thinking about the context of this captive audience for a meal plan, and I was trying to come up with, as you alluded to, the danger of analogies, and I was thinking about the fact that having deployed with the National Guard, when you're in a deployed environment, you have very few dining opportunities or very few options for eating, and I thought to myself, I was generally pretty impressed with the quality of the food that we were provided in most of those circumstances. But it dawned on me that the people that make decisions about those contracts, basically the generals ate the same food that we did. And so I think that you inherently had that representation in that conversation. And so, I would just simply say that I believe that it would be absolutely appropriate, and I know others may disagree on this board, I'm not sure, but I think it would be appropriate to have a voting voice. The alternative, and obviously you can, feel how loaded this is, the alternative would be anybody that serves on that is compelled to purchase a meal plan, so that everybody then has some skin in the game and understanding what the equality and so on is being provided in that setting. So at least from this particular member of the board, I would strongly support giving that kind of representation to those who actually are compelled to consume the product to ensure that we're as responsive as we can be. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Regent Beeson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as you indicated earlier, we did have a strong conversation with the student leadership yesterday. Talked both about process as well as about some of the specific issues that are being objected to. One of the comments I made at the meeting when they asked us for our opinion and some thoughts was that I'm going to ask staff to really look at hiring an outside consultant to help you with development of the RFP, because we don't do this. We haven't done this in 20 years. And I've got to think that there are people out there who could help you with the best language and the current practices about what's being, we're dealing with national food provider. If we decide to go and stay with outside private sector vendors, these are companies that are so skilled in language and what's in contracts and what's not in contracts. I'm just talking out loud. I mean, I haven't spoken with you about this directly, but you do a really good job in delivering the food to our students, in my opinion, and it's not perfect, but you're not necessarily experienced in dealing with the big guns of the food industry. And so we want an RFP that's going to be as inviting as possible, but also that meets our values, and there's a balance on that. So I hope you give that some consideration as we go into this process.
Senior Vice President Burnett.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Regent Beeson, the University Services did bring in a dining consultant, even in this process, and that was in some of the documentation. So it is something we are very supportive of. They were very helpful for us, actually, to understand the significance of going from contracted to self-op. And so we brought in a national dining consultant, did a lot of work, and I can see where they would actually be a part. They would follow on to help us with the RFP, but I'd let Vice President Bertelsen chime in there. So we have that consulting process already in play in this decision.
Vice President Bertelsen, anything to add?
Mr. Chair and Regents, we hear that point, and that's something we've been talking about too, exactly. We certainly will be having some outside assistance in the process generally. We haven't hired specifically for that task right now. Our focus has been around the community feedback and engagement to set the priorities, but that is part of our planning going ahead.
Thank you.
Regent Shu.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. Thank you, presenters. So I existed on this campus with the old Pioneer Hall, and that's where I ate, and it was self-operated at the time. And I honestly couldn't tell you what the quality of food is here, but I have heard the complaints. In fact, the provost and I were at dinner the other night at a CLA awards ceremony, and we just happened to be sitting with a student who just happened to be one of those people who desired to have special, special food. I can't remember if it was for religious reasons or what, but as soon as she realized that we were really kind of asking her for her opinion, she actually gave us her opinion, and it was fairly negative. And she was able to find food, but she, as a resident of Comstock Hall, basically went to all of the different dining facilities to find the right food on the right day, because after she had kind of been through kind of several weeks of the food at Comstock, she realized that there was other food, other menu items available, but at other facilities. So she would have to go to 17th Avenue from Comstock, and she would have to go to Superblock from Comstock, and so on. I don't know if she ever went to Bailey, but that's already pretty far to go in search of the right food. And so I looked at the numbers, and it looks like we're paying Aramark 5%. So really the question is, what can we do with 5% of $50 million, $2.5 million a year, I think is the number, $2 to $2.5 million a year. And as I understand it, Aramark is really just providing the management, since we're providing students that work there, and we have unions that support them and all that kind of stuff. So to me, it really is something that we should look hard at. And last month we had Chancellor Black come up, and I was actually surprised. His operation is about half of I think what we have in the Twin Cities. And what we have in the Twin Cities is relatively small compared to what our pure Big Ten, other Big Ten schools have. And because they typically have more people living on campus and eating in their dormitories or their residence halls. So I'm trying to kind of think through this in terms of what is it that the students are really looking for. And I can see the solution being self-operated. I can see the solution also being just having a better Aramark, better contractor. So I'm supportive of this. I do think that we should consider adding students to the actual voting groups that are actually going to provide the recommendations for the president. Other than that, I think food is very important, and I want to link it into mental health and all the other initiatives the president has going on right now. And I mean, if you're not finding the right food for your particular diet, whether it's gluten-free or whatever, it can be stressful for these students, and they are paying a significant amount of money for these meal plans. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Shu. Regent Kenyanya.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple comments without narrating or too much. I do support the student ask for representation. Pretty simple. I haven't really looked at this resolution in depth because we just got it here. But in skimming it, I do appreciate that the students also voice support for the 2-year extension. Just kind of shows that we know what they also said in the resolution that they support self-op. That's pretty clear. But even with supporting that, they are being reasonable and understanding that the extension is necessary. So I just want to say I appreciate that in the resolution. Question for Vice President Bertelsen. Looking at the proposed path forward slide, where else, when would this come back to the board, or where would the board have future interaction with this? Would it be, for the approval of a contract because it's excess of $1 million, or are there going to be other touch points there?
Vice President Bertelsen.
Mr. Chair and Regent, yes, it would be next fall. So when you see fall 2020, that would be, we would have gone through the RFP process, would have completed the self-performance business plan, and be able to make some comparison judgments between those opportunities, and then would be bringing back to you a recommendation for either one of the RFP solutions or to move toward a self-operation direction. So we would have a choice, a pathway, and then from there would be implementation. So our plan at this stage would be, to come back to the board once we had a recommendation to bring to you.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Regent Kenyanya, follow up.
So just clarifying the decision whether or not to issue an RFP versus go self-op would be made by the advisory group or the appropriate administrators, not the board?
Vice President Bertelsen.
Mr. Chair, Regent, so maybe I need to back up for a minute. Today, what we're asking you for is up to 2 years of up to 2 year extension with the plan that we will be issuing an RFP in the spring. At the same time, while we're pursuing that, we are simultaneously building a business plan for what it would look like to self-operate, with the idea that at the end of that RFP process, we will have a completed self-operation plan, and when we compare equal along the same merits and the same criteria, a self-operation plan against the RFP solutions. And then what we would be doing is make a recommendation to pick one of those RFP responses or to choose to self-operate. And that's the decision that we'll bring back to you as a board to decide to self-operate or to choose one of the RFP selections and go that route. Does that answer your question?
That answers my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Last Regent question here, Regent Mayeron, then we need to move on.
Thank you, Regent McMillan. Addressing the request in the Student Association resolution for student representative on the executive committee, a voting student representative. My question is there precedent for doing this in other committees or task force, perhaps not related to the dining issue, but on other issues? Or is this the first time that the Student Association has requested voting representation on a particular task force? So I'm trying to get an understanding whether we've done this before or on a case-by-case basis, or this is something new and different with respect to this particular issue. Obviously, their input is critical, and it's clear to me they've been providing input, and we continue to seek student input. The question goes further, though, in terms of voting on a recommendation. And I'm not quite sure who to direct that question to, Chairman.
Yeah, thank you, Regent Mayeron. Regent Beeson and I had some similar conversation yesterday with the student leaders, and I don't know who the right person with that level of background would be at the administration here, but somebody knows whether we've done this before or not. Vice President Bertelsen, should we start with you? You can phone a friend in the audience, perhaps. So.
Mr. Chair, this is a broader question that you're asking about governance and decision-making at the university kind of in, I think that we have to go back to others to try to answer broadly. I think to your point, we systematically and always for many topics, if it seek out ways to involve student involvement and voice and participation. I'm sure I'm going to miss some example. In my experience, typically don't have students being part of making the final decision. So from the executive committee, effectively, I maybe need to be a little more clear. So in the RFP process, we'll have people sort of reviewing, going through that process. We intend to get student feedback on the RFP process as well. When it comes to making a final recommendation to you, that's really what the executive committee does, is make a final recommendation on a direction to the board. Where effectively, they make the recommendation to the president makes the recommendation to you. So at some point, it becomes administration, and the president has to make a final recommendation to you as the board, upon which you will still have, of course, feedback from others as well. So on those kind of executive management sort of decisions, historically, in my experience, students have not been part of that final side of decision-making executive committee, but we do systematically look for ways to involve students. And in this case, we have a identified student advisory committee who we intend to be seriously involved and active throughout the process. I hope that answers the question.
Well, I think as you said, it is a broader and bigger governance question as to precedent, but I think from Regent Beeson and my standpoint as committee leaders, we would strongly advocate for deep and ongoing commitment and engagement with the two of you, certainly, and other senior management leaders with the Student Advisory Committee, and then the board or the leadership team here, President Gable and her team have heard board level interest in, whether there's something more formal than that. There's a document that Regent Beeson and I had yesterday that lays out in a horizontal axis and a vertical axis all the component parts of this from a process standpoint, and I'd encourage the board office or the administration to get that out to the regents too. So as this formulates and you move forward from what we're doing today, which is limited to authorizing the extension, and then you, President Gable, and the leadership team come up with a plan to implement how you're going to do that, that diagram can help inform this, because there's several layers, and it was confusing to us until we had that diagram in front of us. So I don't think we need it today at this moment, but it'll be helpful to the board as we go forward. So thank you for that answer. I'd like to call this for a vote now on the extension. The resolution again is before you, and I would ask all the regents in favor of this to signify so with a sign of aye. Aye. Opposed? Very good. Thank you, Vice President Bertelsen. Are you staying put for our next item too?
Yes, sir.
It's a marathon day for you up here.
We're very excited.
Yes. And AVP Kruger is joining us, I see, and getting some water there. Stay fully hydrated, right? We're going to start with the Shriners, or the 2025 East River Parkway property, and move from that into a discussion about Murphy Warehouse, 701 24th Avenue Southeast property. Take those independent and begin with the East River Parkway. Any introductory remarks from the President or Executive Vice President? Vice President Kruger.
Thank you, Chair McMillan, members of the committee. Our first real estate transaction today is the proposed acquisition of 2025 East River Parkway, Minneapolis, otherwise known as the Shriners Hospital. Given that the committee received a full presentation at the September meeting, I will take 1 minute to briefly remind the committee of the highlights of the transaction and what additional information we have received since we presented last month. The university proposes to acquire the 10.2-acre property for $22.5 million. The facility consists of a 103,500 square foot, two-level hospital and clinic building with an attached 14,000 square foot hotel and conference facility and a 172 space parking ramp. The facility will be used for the future home of the Institute for the Child and Adolescent Brain Health. Dean Quam and Vice President Toller provided you an overview of the program last month and are here in the audience today to respond to any additional questions that the board has regarding the program costs and opportunities for funding. As you may recall, at last month's meeting, we identified a preliminary cost estimate for renovations of $27 million to $33 million. Since that meeting, we have received the results of the facility condition assessment, and the project team has continued to refine the program. We have expanded the scope of the pre-designed project to include the mechanical systems and other facility condition issues that need to be addressed, and expect the pre-design to be complete by mid-November prior to the December 9th expiration of the due diligence period. These efforts are leading us to increase our current estimated cost for the renovations. The administration has given the team a target of $37.5 million for the capital project, with a direction to identify the implications for meeting this target. This target creates a total cost of $60 million, inclusive of both the purchase and the renovation. If the real estate acquisition is approved by the board, we will proceed with additional design in order to return to the Regents for capital budget amendment and schematic design review later in FY20. And with that overview, we are available to respond to any additional questions the board may have.
Thank you. And the resolution, can we get that in front of us? Or is it's just a motion at this point, so a motion recommending approval of the purchase. And I'd ask a board member to move that.
So moved.
Very good.
Second.
Moved and seconded to recommend approval of the 2025 East River Parkway property. Let's move into discussion. Regent Shu.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. Thank you, presenters. Did I hear last time correctly that the money was already pretty much raised for this project?
Vice President Kruger.
Chair McMillan, Regent Shu, there has been significant fundraising efforts have already been underway, and we have received a significant commitment that would cover the cost of the acquisition of the property and then some. The fundraising continues to occur, and the intention is that additional funds would be raised to, and I would defer to, I would defer to Vice President Toller for any additional information related to those opportunities and how that will fit into the pro forma.
Very good. Dean Tolar.
Mr. Chair, Regent Shu, Regents, thank you again for looking favorably at this. At the last time, Regent Shu, you listened carefully, and I appreciate this. And what I said last time was that we have north of above half, of that 60 million, already secured. The philanthropy momentum is enormous. It's unbelievable. We have just in the last week and a half, we had 2 discussions that both would be very significant contribution to that whole enterprise. And the momentum is enhanced, I think, by the fact that this is a priority for the, not just for the medical school and the university, but for the president, Gable, and also for the mHealth joint clinical enterprise. And it's a nice coincidence that 10th of October is the World Mental Health Day since 1992. I didn't make it up. Since 1992, this is the day where mental health is being celebrated around the globe. Thank you.
Regent Shu, follow up?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Dean Tolar, for that. I'm supportive of this, and I also believe you said last time that this would be the only thing of its kind in the world. I forgot what words you used, but that's kind of my takeaway, and I think that's something that we should be looking to do, and I'm supportive of this project.
Thank you. Regent Anderson.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. On Regent Shu's comments there, Dr. Toller, we like to talk about the good of society, good for mankind. In your opinion, this project will help University of Minnesota Medical School child adolescents push the envelope forward for a service that is good for mankind. That's what I want to know.
Dean Tolar.
Mr. Chair, Regent Anderson, yes. Yes. I cannot be, more eloquent on this. This is the one opportunity we have to be unique, and as the president said last time, we serve Minnesotans, but by virtue of serving Minnesotans well, we serve everyone. This is a unique, world-class signature enterprise for this whole field.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Tolar. adding my own thoughts to this. I come at a expansion of this nature of our footprint and our academic and clinical services with some trepidation, because it is an expansion, and I think the materials that came out help us get our arms around what we might expect in the way of added revenues, added costs, and making sure we're not jumping into a pool we don't know how deep it is. But those trepidations are limited because this is as core to our mission as anything I think we can do in addressing child and adolescent brain development. Issues like autism is where Minnesota expects us to be, and as a couple of people just noted, perhaps they'll be proud that we're in a world-leading position here. So I'm supportive of this, and I don't have any further questions, but certainly remain open to the board. I see Regent Rocha has a question.
Yeah, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. More of a comment. I think this is significant, as Regent Anderson and Regent McMillan pointed out. From my perspective, we've all cared deeply about the success of our academic health enterprise, and we've been concerned about what we saw as a shift from being prominent among our peers across the globe to struggling, and a lot of it is the economic realities that have hit healthcare, and particularly in this market that shifted the relationship between the university in its tertiary care role and its research role. And just a few years ago, I know I felt, I don't want to use the word despair, but it's within that family of having these sort of locked-in facilities, very aged, not a lot of control, and really struggling to find a direction with a partnership that, while having promise, was not fulfilling that promise to the extent necessary to really help us propel forward. And over the last several years, a couple years, particularly with the work that Dean Tolar has been putting in, and certainly the enthusiasm he has brought to the position, it was remarkable to have this opportunity come forward, because it addresses some of that facilities component. It addresses that uniqueness component that at one point in time, as Regent Anderson is well aware, we had very identifiable areas of success, and so I do this feels like a really big moment in our ability to define ourselves as an institution in addressing this area that is, over the last few years shown to be kind of the 800-pound gorilla of healthcare risks for our society. And so I really appreciate you bringing this forward. I appreciate the Shriners for giving us this opportunity to the extent that it was presented to us. And I'm very excited to see where this goes for the future. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Regent Rocha. Regent Mayeron.
Thank you, Regent.
Be sure you pull your mic close there, will you?
All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Very good.
Vice President Bertelsen, in your memo that was contained in our materials, you identify the resources to pay for facility costs and identify that the resources come from a combination of different items, including fundraising, leasing revenue, cost savings from commissioned facilities, and possibly collegiate funds, which would be utilized to pay for any remaining operating and debt service costs. I recognize that last component is probably a function of, in particular, what happens in connection with fundraising and the extent of the fundraising. But are you able to give any estimate as to what impact it might have on the collegiate funds to make up for the remaining operating and debt service costs, or a range?
Vice President Bertelsen, I know you've got your collegiate leaders here, so.
Yes, Regent Chair and Regent. So there is, I'll try to answer as simply as I can. I think that there's sort of two sides of the picture, and I'll try to deal with them separately. The programmatic piece which you raised, I think largely the programs that are coming to this space exist today and have existing resources. So that's about sort of, there may be some marginal things, and the colleges, the deans are working on to define that and understand it more clearly. But we're not creating an entirely new thing that doesn't exist. We're creating something that exists disparately in a unique place and gathering space, of which I think will make something new out of that. the newer, bigger cost is going to become from the purchase and renovation. And as it was, we had in our memo, and Dean Toller identified that to the extent that fundraising is successful, any remaining gap will shrink. And so if we're able to, pay, if we were so successful that we could pay for all the pay for the purchase and the renovation, then there'd be no debt cost, which we had estimated that if we had, could be $3.7 million or so if there was no fundraising. But already we've fundraised well over half of that. And so the way that those funds are coming in will pay for all the debt service for the first 10 to 11 years of that. And if we're successful, that will continue to lower that. So, so after 11 years, if there is no more, that's up to $2.5 million of debt service for the next 10 years. The operating cost is a thing that we are early in projecting. Is sort of we're trying to think inclusively about operations, insurance, capital renewal. Do we need shuttle services? All those kind of pieces. We think that's in slightly over $2 million. And so I think that really is the gap, or is the total of that. We think 15% of that could be probably leased to someone else. So I think there's probably, if I had to say roughly, the operating costs yet to be covered is probably in that $1.5 million range. There's still work to be done, and I don't, so I think we're optimistic there's solutions. But.
Dean Tolar, something to add on the academic programming side of that?
Mr. Chairman, Regent Mayron, I want to answer your comment or question by amplifying what Regent Rocha said. Despair, yes, but my despair is of the cheerful variety. This is the magnetism, that has been created around this enterprise that, yes, has the philanthropy. But one other thing that is important to mention is I've been able, because of your vision and your direction, recruit a prestigious leader from the prestigious West Coast University already. And he alone, with his team, will bring grants that are, if I don't count what's pending, which is a high likelihood, which I estimate about $7.5 million a year, about 1.7 to 2.5, is already in his hands, So there is a additional stream of funding which will amplify and secure some of the concerns that Regent Mayron you have. And as Chair McMillan mentioned at the beginning, and you also commented on, this will increase the ranking of the medical school because these are NIH funds. Thank you.
Very good. So next time I find myself despairing, I can break my despair into regular despair and gleeful despair. And categorize it appropriately. Regent Simonson.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. Thank you, presenters. Left home without my iPad, so I'm thankful for iPhones. I, too, am very supportive of it, and I really appreciate Dean Toller, your associate from Stanford. I think that's a real deal. I have one question as I'm reading the program costs and resource operations. One of the things you say is relocation of these programs and clinics to the Shriners campus frees up program and clinic spaces for other facility recruitments and to optimize pediatric clinical performance at current locations. Quick question, is that a problem now? Do we have space limitations?
Dean Tolar.
Chair McMillan, Regent Simonson, thank you again for listening carefully. Yes, the space limitations on the West Bank are absolutely real. We are diverting level 3, level 4 NICU patients, almost every day, which is unbelievable. And we need more space. So by virtue of negotiating with CEO Hereford, and he's fully aware, he was sitting next to me when I presented to you last time, he's fully aware of this, by alleviating some of the space concerns that we have on the West Bank, especially on the pediatric psychiatry and behavioral health. Yes, this will open up, a choices of freedom, that we need now, for the joint clinical enterprise that you have so well supported.
Follow-up question?
Yeah, Regent
So is this part of a strategic plan going forward to make sure that space limitation is covered in capital requests and so on and so forth? I mean, it's an important program, obviously.
Chairman
Dean Toller?
Regent Simonson. Yes, this is a part, so there's a capital request of the university and the medical school, of course, but the separate investment comes from the joint clinical enterprise, which is between your, physician group, University of Minnesota Physicians or M-Physicians and the Fairview Health Services. So there are investments from number of streams, that are all nucleating and focused, on getting enough space very quickly so that we can reclaim, to Regent Rocha comment, essential dominant position on the market in Midwest.
Thank you. All right, I'm the motion's before the board to recommend approval of the purchase of 2025 East River Parkway. I think we've had adequate discussion, and I'd call for a vote of the board. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Very good. That matter carries, and we now move on to item B, or 3B, which is the sale of the 701 24th Avenue Southeast, also known as the Murphy Warehouse. And from my perspective, I listened carefully and got through all my board materials and participated by phone last week or last month, and I thought the committee discussion was excellent on that, on this topic. I thought it focused probably more on the potential upside of holding the land, and I think the dialogue and the significant research. Regent Beeson has done a ton of this. Others have done plenty as well, including site inspections, is focused on the opposite, the flip side of there's always downside associated with upside, and we've looked at quite a bit more of that, and I think the full committee has a much better understanding of where we stand today than we did last week. So with that, Assistant Vice President Kruger, do you have some introductory remarks before we consider this?
Thank you, Chair McMillan, members of the committee. Again, given that the committee received the full presentation on this proposed transaction at the September meeting, I will simply provide a brief overview of the transaction. The University Administration proposes the sale of this 21.76 acre parcel to Ryan Companies US Incorporated for $22 million. The property consists of 38 interconnected building sections totaling over 706,000 square feet, constructed between 1902 and 1977. Closing would occur on or before December 18th, 2019. The buyer would assume the Murphy Warehouse lease, and the sale is contingent upon the successful negotiation of a lease with the university to continue to occupy space at the facility as well. And with that overview, we are available for any additional questions that the committee may have.
All right. I know there's board interest in this, but I'd begin by seeking a motion to recommend approval of the sale. So moved. Very good. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Let's discuss. And I know Regent Beeson, again, I commend you for, one, your subject matter expertise in this arena, and two, your diligence in investigating this. So I'd ask you to perhaps open our discussion with some of your perspective.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, staff. On Monday, Regent Rocha and I were able to take a site visit, and there's really nothing like actually getting on site and looking at the property and kicking the tires, if you will. I found it very helpful, and Regent Rocha will express his views, I'm sure, and his conclusions. I have been an advocate for land banking and for building a off-site storage facility for some time, and on that basis, I support the acquisition in 2015. When we consummated that transaction, we really had not done all of our due diligence, and we went in with our eyes open in terms of what we had done and what we hadn't done. We hadn't gone through the design process. We didn't have detailed estimates, condition of the building, and it was really an opportunistic purchase. Now, at the end of the day, my view, after all the information that I've seen related to the lease and the other information, is that we're not, stepping way back, we are not the right owners for this building. And I don't think any amount of additional time is going to change that basic fact. The building's original designs and the condition of the buildings are really not suited to our needs. Our needs are more defined now, and I just don't think there's a good match. So a third of the buildings are not usable for storage and never will be usable for storage. They have a higher use, which Ryan is looked at, and those buildings should be saved, but they should be converted to a very different use than storage. The other parts of the buildings are operating. There's deferred maintenance, but they're really not for today's storage needs. It's been told to me, they're not at all consistent with what we need going forward. And we do need a plan. We need a plan about our storage. We don't have a plan. We need a plan for operations center. And we've got the Como property. Whether that's sufficient or not, I don't know, but we do need a plan. And I'm going to say this, the Murphy family is a wonderful family. Dick Murphy taught here. Dick Murphy loved the university. This family was a great corporate citizen. I knew the patriarch of the family. I know that their interests in the university have been here forever, and their expectation was that we would hold on to this for a long, long time. But, it's our job to make these tough decisions, and sometimes we have to reverse what we thought. And I apologize to the Murphys that we have to do this, but I just think there's a better steward for this property going forward, and I think Ryan's a wonderful developer. If Ryan can't fulfill the purchase, I'm more than open to sort of letting this go back out in the market and finding a replacement buyer, because I think it's a sleeper property. I don't know that we've talked to enough developers. We've talked to warehouse operators and owners, but I don't know that we've talked to as many developers, so I think we could sell the property. It is at market value. So this is a little bit of a no harm, no foul situation where what we're getting out, what we put into it, and I know expectations have been dashed around the property. Hopefully we can develop a land banking policy and look at getting some additional parcels. But I just don't think this is the right complex of buildings for the reasons that I've said, and I think we should vote to move ahead with the sale. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Beeson. Other Regent interest questions, comments? Regent Simonson.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. Thank you, presenters. I was just looking through the notes here again, trying to read it. And some of the policy questions that were raised considering opportunities for the land. How does the land align with university long-range master planning? How long into the future are projected uses benefits to the university? What is the cost to carry the investment until it's needed? President Gable is working on a strategic plan. It seems to me to give it some time would make sense to answer some of these policy questions. What's the hurry to sell it?
Vice President Bertelsen.
Mr. Chair and Regent, I think that ultimately is a decision for you as a board. We feel our obligation is to present you a choice and to give you updated information. As Regent Beeson gave you a history, I think, quite well. We entered into it as sort of an opportunity purchase with some thought about what its purpose could be, which would have then given us an operating purpose to hold it for some period of time. So a couple things have shifted, and we felt that, and there was an interest from the market for purchase. We felt it was our obligation to identify what had changed and give you a sense of what that market price would look like. There were buyers that would have covered our cost plus some, and we felt it was the right direction. I think from though it was an opportunity cost, a variety of things have shifted. One, it no longer looks to be the right solution for us to be the collections facility. We thought that it could have been, but it turns out that cost to do that became prohibitive. The second is that sort of a market, the tax changes have made it more interesting for developers to take on that kind of site. That doesn't apply to us. Those don't work for us. And third, I think our focus has kind of shifted since from 2015 to be more along the east, moving east of campus, as some actions that we've already brought to you, the purchase of University Village. And in that case, there is a land we think that is part of a long-term land banking strategy, and there's a revenue stream that covers those costs. In this particular case, there is a carrying cost to you as the board and in the institution. We were able to, for some short period of time, put off some capital investments which are incumbent, and if we hold, it'll be necessary for us to make some pretty significant capital investments. Before we do that and bring you a capital budget amendment, this gives you a chance to make a choice. Do you want to hold and make some capital investments for that purpose, or do we want to say that this is not our direction and we should sell and then use those resources in a different way? Hopefully that answers your question.
Follow up, Regent Simonson?
It just makes, can we hold on some of the capital costs, at least get a strategic plan laid out so we can look at this? The value is not going to go down, I'm assuming, over time. So again, what's the hurry? I'd like to see what our plan is, and the location is not bad.
Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In just a response to Regent Beeson's comments a minute ago, I want to make sure that we don't, perceive this resource or this asset as solely the buildings that are there. We know that with a cost, we could clear that parcel, and you have 21 acres of land available for a wide range of uses. To put this in context, this parcel is nearly half the size of the West Bank of the Twin Cities, of the Minneapolis campus. Certainly of the traditional West Bank that we got lots of other little properties that run that number up, but it's a significant piece of land, and it's very important, not just for the current use of the university, but for the future vision of the institution to be developed by this board and future boards, just like the West Bank itself was when we acquired it. It was obviously not an up and running campus when we acquired it. We acquired it with a vision for what it would end up being. And I think that this is a significant vote. Mr. Chair, I asked for a roll call vote on it, as it relates to selling this property. So in broad overview, the sale of the property does not benefit the university or the people it serves on financial, stewardship, or planning grounds, and I'll get into that. The financials that we've received have been confusing, and I think to a large extent incomplete, and as Vice President Bertelsen knows, I'm having a communication and asked for understanding, why is this cost being assessed to this property? Why is this cost being assessed to this property? Because we have costs that are not a result of this property being allocated to this property, as apparently is the way we do it across various properties, but those costs have to be paid. Unrecovered debt from other circumstances, other bond issues, they're not related to this particular property. But to get down to it, for the university to benefit from the sale of this property, we have to pay off the bonds issued for its initial purchase 3 years ago, and there's something between $14-15 million. That means that, assuming we don't have a bunch of closing costs, other costs, which I anticipate there will be some in there, that would leave our yield at about $7 million. So to put that in perspective, and assuming that it is that high, that's less than 2/1000ths of our 1-year budget for the university. For a single year to lose real estate that is over half the size of our Morris campus and closer than the West Bank is to the East Bank in the Twin Cities. But there's more. If you take that $7 million, and assuming the benefit is that high, it will get eaten up by the fact that we are using some of that space. We will have to pay some third party who then owns the property to use that space, or we have to find or build or some other space to replace that property. So that amount of money, if you again, even assuming that we yield that much, goes away because we will have to be paying somebody else for that space. But there's more. When you talk about, there's an internal charge, I still can't quite understand it. There was this $24 million that was required The actual price of our acquisition of this property over 21 years is closer to 17 million when you talk about the principal and the interest on the bonds for the purchase. So the benefactor who sold us the property, and we'll get into that in a minute, the rent that they're paying is greater than the interest on these bonds. Basically, not only did the Murphys give us a couple $1 million in philanthropic asset, they're paying for our acquisition of this property. And so any cost that we have on that bond that exceeds, excuse me, beyond what they're giving us is not a loss. It's an investment in an asset that is going to continue to grow in value. So, you know, we don't have an obligation right now for significant investment in the property at this time. We know that there's some sprinkler issues, and we knew about that when we purchased the property. But when we throw a number out like $54 million in investment, what I thought was really interesting in the analysis is it was, you know, somewhat of an arbitrary number because we don't really know what the strategic plan is going to have. We know that we have these numerous storage needs as were identified to those of us on the board at the time that we made the acquisition. But when you make that investment is worth something to us. We're looking at it and saying, well, we're only getting this much lease value. But then if we make this substantial investment in the property, we either are going to get a tremendous amount of use out of it, which has value to the university, or we're going to be able to lease it to some other people that is going to generate more revenue that will recover the cost of that investment. So there was a real concern raised by Regents Figum about needlessly removing property from the tax rolls. And as we've confirmed, any land that's leased to for-profit entities does pay property tax. And any land or facilities that are used by the university on this property would enjoy the tax preferences that is intended for that purpose. And if we're guided by that concern, what it would mean is we should be making investments to get more private entities that would be generating revenue for us, because then that property would also be contributing to the public fisc through the property taxes. Now, we recently received a letter related to this issue of the donor intent, and that was a question, as you recall, we raised at the last meeting. And it's now crystal clear what the intent is. And I don't know if the student representatives or if others have received a copy of the letter from the Murphy family stating that their intent was not to provide this property so that as soon as, they weren't expecting us to flip it. And if they were, you certainly would have expected it to be more profit than what we're talking about now. Because I would note that the exuberance of the opportunity zones has caused an increase in the appraised value that basically tracks the increase in all commercial property over that same period, a couple % a year. But our ability to attract future bequests is going to be affected by what this board does. If we have someone provide us an opportunity like this, provide a substantial multi-million-dollar contribution to the university, and then we simply disregard it, really a matter of months later, for 2/1000ths of 1 year's budget of the university, I think that would cause a lot of potential philanthropic contributors to the university to think twice as to whether they can believe we are going to hold fast and honor their commitments. From a stewardship and planning perspective, it's axiomatic that if we don't own the property, we don't control the property. And if we have no control, we have no planning options to serve the future of the university, whether it was the first property on which the university was built, our acquisition of any of our system campuses, the property on the West Bank or the St. Paul campus. At some point, we had predecessors that had the vision to accept or acquire an asset before it was actually functioning at full capacity. They understood it would be future regents and future leaders of the university who would develop those opportunities and take them to their full potential. And this property, again, over half the size of the Morris campus and closer to the East Bank than the West Bank is, already has solid value, as was identified when we acquired it. The docket materials when we purchased it never cited a library archive as a basis for the sale. And it was likely part of the, and this is a quote, consolidation of storage in numerous locations at the present time. And even if the current facilities aren't amenable to building the library archives within it, which we saw, Regent Beeson, that need still exists. We'll still be compelled to create such a facility, and we'll need space to do so, and the Murphy warehouse property offers us that space, but only if we own it. From a storage standpoint, even though you might not say this particular parcel is within the mix, I mean, it's literally just blocks from, it was very, very close to campus already. The ability to consolidate the storage from other facilities throughout the Twin Cities and even across the system allows the space that's currently being used for that storage in those areas to be developed to a better and higher use. So it may be 21 acres a couple blocks away, but it opens up thousands of square feet right in the heart of the East Bank, the West Bank, St. Paul campus, and again, potentially other campuses, depending on the frequency of need of access to that space. So for the sake of the discussion, assume that donor intent, financials, and our planning and stewardship obligations don't strongly support retaining the property. Well, right now, our policy appears to prevent a sale at this point. Approval of the sale of property, which is required by the board if it's greater than 10 acres within 2 miles of campus or over $1 million, occurs, quote, either prior to the execution of the purchase agreement, once the definitive terms of the agreement have been negotiated, or after the execution of the purchase agreement with closing contingent upon the board's approval. Well, this property is more than 10 acres, within 2 miles, and well over $1 million. But we don't have any idea what our lease is going to be. And so when this goes back to that flexibility concern about how refined is the deal for us as a board to understand what our obligations are. Because we have no idea what the lease arrangement will be, and it violates our own policy and our responsibility to protect university resources if we proceed with a sale without knowing what that would actually look like. Because again, we are going to go from paying ourselves for an asset that is ultimately being purchased by the benefactor to selling it for 2 1,000ths of 1 year's budget, and then having to pay somebody else for the use of that very same space that we currently own. The board should be very concerned about how this was handled. We know that the benefactors were not consulted about their donor intent, and I owe them and all current and future donors that respect. Mr. Chair, this is a long soliloquy, and I apologize for it, but I was really struck that this even came to us in this fashion. I have more commentary about the fact that this board has taken a position on a property with an expectation that it would be developed a certain way, and for over a third of the time that we've had the property, there was an independent decision in contradiction to the board's position that kept us from developing the property in a way that would certainly support its retention. I will reserve my comments on that perhaps for another time, but again, understanding that the actual cost of this facility, based on the numbers that we have been provided, is far lower. The expectations of the compelled investment are within our control and at our own discretion to be guided by a strategic vision to be developed. The original intention of the storage consolidation from all of the different locations throughout our campus already continues to exist and continues to have the ability to be supported with this property. And I think that, particularly considering that the intent of the donors from whom we accepted the gift and who are currently paying for the acquisition of this over time, all cautions against us approving this sale. And at a minimum, if we were to consider it, I think we should do it on a much stronger footing and with much greater clarity about where this institution is going with our strategic vision for facilities and for understanding what these numbers are. Because I currently have numbers requests that are still pending that I have not received. I don't appreciate being compelled to vote on a matter of this significance, a piece of property this large, without having all of that information. So I would ask the board to vote against the sale at this time. Thank you.
All right. I would remind all of our colleagues that we do have a closed meeting coming, and we have a limited amount of time to do that at the tail end and quite a bit of business ahead. So I've got 4 regents yet to speak. Regent Davenport, we'll go to you next.
Thank you, Chair McMillan and Vice President. First off, I'd say that I'm hesitant to give up land anytime, but today with a better understanding of the limitations and obligations, I have a better understanding of that. Question I have is if we sell this property and we look at future planning, and this might be crystal ball, but what are the prospects for purchasing land in the future in close proximity? What's our history of holding or managing land investments, our experience with that? And then some comment back perhaps on the notion of Regent Simonson's delay of decision on this.
Thoughts about ability to purchase land, Regent or Vice President Bertelsen?
Mr. Chair and Regents, so as to the fortune looking ahead for land acquisition, I'd say we've been quite active in recent times. Much of the areas around where you now see the Biodiscovery District and even the stadium were not part of the university all that long ago. We've added the space where the Days Inn, we're now in a joint partnership for the space that now is the Days Inn. We now own the University Village, the block, the space where the Clinical Surgery Center is, and the block to the east, which is now a parking lot, is future development for a future clinical campus. We are actively in process, and you've both approved some, and we're rapidly preparing for you, hopefully, additional real estate actions kind of between here and here on. So we are active toward that goal and see real need. It's about, for us, where do we think our planning direction and the campus growth is headed. So there are certainly, part of the issue is with limited resources, where should we be putting those and where is the direction for campus development? I support, we are active supporters of having lots of land and facilities to give us opportunities to make choices. It's just a matter of how many we can pursue at the same time and at what time. So to our history of making choices, land purchases and then acquisition, I'd say that we have a pretty good long record of buying it toward the direction of where the campus is grown. Regent Rocha identified the West Bank, and certainly far back in history. More recently is the whole sort of East Gateway, as I said, the stadium and Biodiscovery District. And now we're seeing the planning ahead for the future growth of the clinical campus. So I'd say we've been quite successful at doing that and holding it and then acting on those plans. Sometimes when new information comes, we want to stop and evaluate whether that's still the right course, and that's effectively, I think, where we are today on this one. We made a decision, we want to reassess those principles and the direction, and this is a good conversation to have that. As to your follow-up question that Regent Simonson raised, I think whether we're exact, down to the penny about all the carrying costs and projections, the direction, I believe, is true, that there is operating costs of the facilities, there are capital costs, which we've sort of put at bay, but depending on the time frame we'd want to hold it, those will increase. And we know that there's a variety of things we would have to put in place now. If we're going to hold it for even a moderate time period, we'll have to make some meaningful and significant capital improvements, as well as sort of the debt service to pay that off. So there is a carrying cost, there's a cost to the institution to hold it. That may be the appropriate decision. I mean, that is up to you to decide if that's the appropriate cost to maintain that property for the future. It's also been raised, is there an opportunity to wipe out the space and use it for something else? That is certainly true as well. There's a cost of demolition. We have not designed that cost, so there's no pre-design to that, but that's also a significant cost to do that as well. And I think if there's any other issue I should address, I think we appreciate, as well as others have said, the Murphy family and their participation in this transaction. And I would say from my perspective, it did not go through the foundation as a gift. per se. It was a real estate transaction. So there was not I understand you have some messaging from the family about that. From our understanding, it had not been part of the transaction at the time as knowledge. That may have been intent and known to them, but it was from an operation perspective, that was not something we understood or was part of any in the transaction documents themselves. So that we don't have official intent or direction as part of that transaction. Just that that may be, you can take that for what it is.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Vice President Bertelsen. I'm going to keep moving on here and get all the region commentary on the table or questions. We'll answer those appropriately. Regent Anderson.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. It's great discussion, great discussion. I came here today thinking one way. I may think the other way. I just don't know. I have a couple questions that maybe Mr. Bertelsen or Mr. Burnett can answer. Regent Rocha mentioned that the lease payments are more than our interest payments. Did I read something where we had lease options that our tenants have returned some of that land back to us? So is that still an accurate statement that the lease payments make our payments without additional investment by the university? Is that still a fair statement?
Vice President Bertelsen.
Mr. Chair and Regent Anderson, so lease and rents today are about $1.4 million. Annual principal and interest is about $1.2 million. So just, if that was the only cost, that is certainly true. That is a true statement. In addition, we have operating utilities, insurance, other costs, about $800,000. So
that is the figure. I had been told that we're operating at about a $600,000 deficit annually. Is that a true statement?
2 million. Yeah, we're probably $600,000 to $800,000 a year
deficit
from an annual place before we get into significant capital issues that may come forward.
Okay, so that answers that question. The other question I have, opportunity zones. We've been told that the unsolicited bid originally came because of opportunity zones. Do those tax credits expire in December 31, 2019 for a company like that, or is it going farther out? Do we know?
Assistant Vice President Kruger.
Regent McMillan, Chair McMillan, Regent Anderson. Although I will not pretend to be an opportunity zone tax expert, the research that I've done is that there are some benefits that expire if we do not close prior to the end of the year because of the need for the buyer to hold or the investor to hold those benefits for a 7-year period. But that is a limited amount. So again, my understanding is if they hold it for 5 years, there's a 10% number. And if they hold it for an additional 2 years, there's another 5%. So I would not pretend to know the insides of Ryan Company's pro forma related to that, but there is a impact to their pro forma.
In your opinion, excuse me, it's not a drop dead date, December 31, 2019.
Regent McMillan, Chair McMillan, Regent Anderson, it is not a drop dead date. I think it would impact their pro forma and would most likely impact their offer price to us.
So, with it not being a drop dead date, I've been in business 40 years, and my wife will tell you I don't always make the best decisions, but some of the best decisions I've made are those that I don't make. And I just see the discussion around the board. I don't think we are playing with knowing all the knowledge that we need to know. I think the land value will probably go up. My best case scenario here is I would table this item for the December meeting, get more of that information out there. Even if it was a drop dead date of December 31, 2019, my guess is your group can get to the closing within 20 days. I don't know. That is what I would do because I think, I came here today realizing that holding this property was costing us $600,000 a year. Or, and going forward, it's gonna be 600 and 600 and 600. And we turn that into student tuition, we could have lower tuition if we didn't have to pay 600. Regent Rocha brings up great comments, not the least is, are we following Regent's policy? I don't know if that's what you were talking about. I would argue that the best thing to do here is to table this until our December meeting, and we've got 2 months to get the accurate numbers. So I guess I would actually move that if somebody would second it, but I don't know if that would happen.
Second.
So we've got a motion to postpone that's been moved and seconded. That requires a majority vote of the board. If the board is, or the committee, if the committee is so interested, we can take that vote and then not have further discussion about this, assuming that vote carries. If it doesn't, we'd be back to debating the merits of the motion that is in front of us, which is to support the sale. So that's procedurally where we stand. Regent Anderson, you've made the motion. I don't think we need to take additional discussion on that. We can vote on the motion to, that is a debatable motion. I'm informed by my parliamentarian expert next to me. So let's debate that motion then. And I remind everybody, we have a boatload of business to get done yet today, and we have no extra time beyond 5 to 12. So I find myself saying that all the time, whether I'm chair of the board or chair of this committee, but it is the reality of the world. Regent Mayeron, on the Anderson motion to postpone.
The reason I seconded it is Regent Rocha has brought up a variety of points that at least I'm hearing for the first time, and I have not had an opportunity to absorb, much less understand how they will bear ultimately on whether this is a good decision or to adopt the administration's recommendation or not. And so that's the reason I'm voting or seconded the motion to table, is I think we need to be able to explore the comments that he made, whether that means bringing it up at a December meeting or having a special meeting to address this issue and make sure that we've got a fulsome examination of all of the matters that have been brought up. I'd be open to either, but now I feel like I don't have adequate information to evaluate what Regent Rocha brought up. That's why I seconded the motion.
Thank you. Did I see another hand on the motion to postpone? Regent Hsu?
Do I have to stay on that?
Yeah, you need to stay on that now, or we will lose our way here.
Well, I would say that it makes sense based on what we've heard today. I mean, we have policy questions. We also have issues with receiving timely information. I think that, the effort that staff and administration have been putting into work on this issue have really solely been on the sales side of it and have not looked at the other aspects of this. So, in fact, some of the information that we're receiving kind of within the last day or two. And I didn't go on the tour. I couldn't make it. I didn't actually know about it, but, I had to ask for another tour, and there wasn't time for it. So I think we should wait.
Thank you, Regent Hsu. I see no other hands up on the motion before I call for a vote on. Oh, Regent Swigum, sorry.
Mr. Chairman.
All right, I had you on the list for the broader question, but on this one, please.
Well, I'm going to try to delicately get into the broader question.
I just admonished Regent Hsu not to do that, so.
Maybe I shouldn't do that.
I can't let you do it if I told him not to, so. But please, on the motion to delay and the merits of postponing or not.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I will try to stay on the question of the tabling the issue until the next meeting, maybe in December, or a special board meeting. I think I heard a possibility. With all due respect, Mr. Chairman, it's tough to sit here and not speak my heart and my passion after hearing my friend Regent Rocha speak. It's not to respond in representing my fiduciary responsibility in the best interest of the university. But I'll do so. I'll try to stay away from that, Mr. Chairman, and just say at this time, I think the best process representing this university in its best interests, and lots of reasons would be to go ahead right now and try to pass a motion, but understanding where the board may be laying right now and lying and trying to listen to people. I think maybe getting more information, getting more facts. They're sometimes stubborn things. They don't go away. I would support the tabling motion, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Regent Swigum. I would add, just to put my views on the table, I agree with you. I agree with Regent Beeson. I think that it's important that the board realize that by postponing, we likely significantly imperil the deal at hand. And any sense that somebody could close something days before Christmas, we probably better be careful we don't put too much of an expectation on our team. But we do so with eyes wide open and recognize that, there's downsides to holding land, and we could very well find ourselves holding this land for some time if we postpone. So to clarify, the motion before us is to postpone, which would normally mean until the next meeting. Table would mean that we lay it over for further consideration this meeting, and the motion is to postpone. The next regular meeting of the board is early December, and there may be a special meeting scheduled on other matters. We'll leave it to the board office and the general counsel and the administration as to whether that would present an opportunity in a November meeting to get back to this in a manner that might still enable year-end deal making or not. I'm not opining about that, and I don't want to ask that question. I think I will proceed to call for a vote on the motion to postpone. And Regent Rocha, did your request for a roll call vote include an interim motion?
No.
All right, we will do a voice vote unless someone wants otherwise. All in favor of the Anderson motion to postpone action on the proposed sale of 701 24th Avenue Southeast property? Aye?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
No. All right, that carries, and we're done with that matter, and I trust the administration has significant and adequate guidance as to what the board wants to know, and committee leadership and board leadership will work with the administration and board office leadership as to what our procedural options are going forward. Thank you. We blew through our recess, so if you need a recess, please take one at your own timing. Here's how I want to handle items 4 and 5, given the time we spent on that. I'm going to ask Vice President McMaster to come up and do a truncated version of his material on resident non-reciprocity tuition update. I'm not going to open that up for board questions until Senior Vice President Burnett and Associate Vice President Tonneson also add to that with a budget levers and variables discussion. And if both of you, Vice Provost McMaster and our finance leaders, can look at having your presentation time, we may have an opportunity to have a combined discussion of all these at the tail end of that. But we're already running a little behind here, so let's jump in with you, Vice Provost McMaster, and then immediately follow with Associate Vice President Tonneson. And perhaps you're going to do both of these, at least the significant lift on both of them. Julie, thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Oh, Senior Vice President Burnett, some introductory
I was
comments.
just going to.
I went right by you, sorry on that.
Tee this up just briefly.
Please
Thank you,
tee it
Mr.
up.
Chair. This is our opportunity to update the board on our most recent experience in recruiting the non-resident, non-reciprocity cohort of fall of 19, the current revenue estimates for the tuition generated for this population, and some information that's helping shape our goals in this area for the next year or longer. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Vice Provost McMaster and Associate Vice President Tonneson for the presentation.
Very good. Thank you for that lead-in, and I apologize for trying to skip you. So, Associate Vice President Tonneson.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members. In the docket materials and actually on the first 2 slides of this presentation, we were going to go through some history on our recruitment activities and our revenue, but given the interest of time, we're going to skip right by those and move into some enrollment information for this fall. And then we'll follow up with more revenue information.
Yeah. Chair McMillan, members of the board, just quickly, if we look at the trends over the last 20 years or so with our 4 basic geographies, Minnesota reciprocity, NRNR, that's other U.S. and international, you can see that basically the trend has been going up for Minnesota residents. In fact, this year we surpassed 4,000 for the first time in recent history. We've been trending downward with reciprocity students. We're down over the last 15 years by about 30%. That's not a concern. That's in some ways part of the enrollment plan that we brought forward several years ago. We've had an upward trend other than a blip a year ago with NRNR, non-resident students. We had a long conversation about that blip. And then the surprise this year probably for fall 19 was a significant uptick in international students, which really none of us expected, where we now have the highest number of freshmen ever coming in, approaching 500. We don't necessarily expect that trend to continue, but we're very interested in what will happen in fall 20. The next slide repeats some of these data, but adds a % of each one of these geographies. And as a reminder, the overall goal in the enrollment plan is to have 65% Minnesota residents in the freshman class, 15% reciprocity dropping, 15% NRNR, and then about 5% international. You can see this year, for instance, in terms of the Minnesota residents, we were basically spot on with the 65%, and the other numbers will vary year by year.
Mr. Chair, we're going to skip this slide. It's repetitive information somewhat, so we're just going to blow through that one.
Yeah. So just a few comments on factors that influence the recruitment and yield. And the first 2 points are those that we've made before. We see significant and dramatic shifting geodemographics in the upper Middle West. We've come here with significant data and maps and other charts to show you the alarming trend there. And then this increased competition for national students, and I hear this from all my colleagues, is very serious. And in particular, it's serious in Minnesota because we are a net exporter of our high school graduates. So basically, the two trends that to pull out of this slide would be the increased tuition, and later on, there's a SERU slide, student survey slide we won't get into that shows some concern among our students, our non-resident students, about these trends. And then the enhanced recruitment, where we have put recruiters in Texas, in the New York metro area. We've had one in Illinois. We're adding a second one in California, and we're considering the next spots where we think we could have recruitment success.
Moving beyond a recruitment, when we talk about tuition revenue for non-resident, non-reciprocity students, we need to shift the conversation to include continuing students as well, which is what you see on this slide. So this chart shows for 5 different years 4 things, both for domestic population and for the international population, and then for the 2 combined. First, it shows the gross tuition revenue before institutional discounting. It shows the value of that discounting, which is for scholarships and waivers. It shows the costs within admissions and within global programs for recruiting personnel and associated activities. And then finally, it shows the net revenue per year. You can see on line 14 that the net revenue continues to increase even while the enrollment fluctuates. The large enrollment class for fall 17, which is in column C, impacts the relatively significant growth in revenue for that year. And as it works its way through as a cohort of students, it continues to help offset the lower freshman enrollment from last year, for example, from a revenue perspective. The chart also indicates that total enrollment on line 15 has fluctuated, and it will continue to do so as when there is a variability in that entering class, in the number in the entering class. But the revenue per student continues to grow as the tuition rate has increased without being totally offset by an equivalent growth in discounting. With this fall's tuition rates, we have moved to the middle of the Big Ten, the 8th highest position in the Big Ten in terms of tuition and fees for our non-resident, non-reciprocity students. The increases in the rate over the last 5 years, which have been considerably more aggressive than our peers, have directly led to this position. A number of other institutions in the list, as you can see, have reacted to uncertainty in the market, both related to the competition for our domestic students and the volatility in the international interest, by holding their non-resident rates flat or close to it. So 8 of these schools held their increases to 2% or less this year. And that does include a number of schools that rank obviously lower than our rate does. So that leads us to a conversation about how do we want to move forward?
We're going to skip this.
Okay.
This is a slide we were going to spend a bit more time on, but we can't now. But basically, it reiterates what I talked about a moment ago, and that is in terms of the additional markets we're considering for recruitment. These are domestic markets, not international markets. We're looking at Colorado. We think Washington, D.C. and suburbs has tremendous potential. And on the West Coast, the plan is to have the Northern California recruiters start to move up the coast and also look at the Pacific Northwest and Seattle area. Some of the board had asked for some feedback from our regional recruiters. I won't go through this. You can see that for each one of the geographies, these recruiters have provided some sense of the challenges they have, and then some of the competitive institutions that we're dealing with in those geographies. And the last slide, which I mentioned is, the very last slide, is some of the feedback that we extracted from the CERU, indicating, not surprisingly, some concern among our NRNR students about the significant increases. And what's alarming to me in terms of enrollment management is the sense that some of these students, in fact, might bolt from the university. We hope not, and we'll try to prevent that, but given these increases.
All right. Thank you for being flexible and condensing what is a jam-packed conversation. And I would note at the outset, at least from this Regents' view, that in my time here on the board, few, if any, areas have been as impactful policy discussions have been as robust and ongoing and really continuous as the board's dialogue with the Kaler administration around our strategy. It's been very good, contentious at times, but certainly very well informed and very progressive. And I think that when I look at what I just heard and try to summarize it, you've added $32 or $34 million to maybe 36 is the number to the bottom line, while achieving the board's goal of getting us to the middle of the Big Ten. And to me, that's very well done. And as we go forward with the Gable administration here, what we do next is certainly going to continue to be a robust conversation. And I would open it up to the board at this point with those general observations that you've really done a nice job. And, I know thank you, Jason, for reminding me what I already said, and that is, before we open it up to the board, why don't we jump into Julie's next conversation about budget levers, because this is certainly one of those on the revenue side. So you go forward, and then I will open it up to the full board for conversation about the range of topics, and I'd like Senior Vice President Burnett to lead us in.
As they're bringing up the slide, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and we tee up this in an abbreviated fashion. As you might remember from previous discussions, when we build the biennial request to the state of Minnesota, we do so within the context of a high-level 2-year budget planning framework. The budget for FY21 represents the second year of that general framework, built in the summer of 2018. So while we will tweak the components of the framework and address any new priorities, this budget will be a transition budget for our new president, not something totally new developed by her. Today, our goal is to discuss the primary budget variables for FY21 in that context, providing some history and basic information that will help introduce concepts for the December discussion on the long-range financial projections and help set up conversations about more immediate priorities and goals for FY21. So with that, Associate Vice President Tonneson and I will do a bit of tag teaming on these materials and move through them as you asked quickly.
Thank you, Senior Vice President Burnett. That kind of context and purpose summary is very helpful at the outset. Associate Vice President Tonneson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, as you know, probably I could talk for hours on the budget, so I'm going to try and keep this really brief. Yes, I know that's geeky, but I'm going to
We can listen for hours, so.
I'm going to try and keep it really quick. I think what will help actually with this, if you consider this an introductory conversation about these variables, as this timeline indicates, we will be back before you often during the year about the budget. And in fact, in December, we will be talking more about the cost drivers and the revenue. So this is think about it as really an introductory conversation as we enter into that. So I'm going to try and skip through a bunch of this. Oh, here, we'll go fast. I do want to start with expenditures, and this is just a very quick overview of our total expenditure change from 2009 to 2019, adjusted for inflation. The maroon bar shows the total dollar expenditures of all of our non-sponsored funds have increased 9.5% over this time period, which translates to an average annual increase of 0.9%. Unpacking that a little bit, for the state appropriation and tuition funds in the gold bars, the average annual increase has only been 0.1%, with actually a less than 1% increase over this time period. We're going to talk about some of the variables that are more important in the expenditure side to budget planning in the upcoming slides. But I think it is important to look at this overall picture and the story that it tells a little bit. Over this same time frame, we have had an increase in programming. We have had a 1% increase in enrollment, a 45% increase in sponsored awards, an 11% increase in the total number of buildings maintained, 15% increase in our gross square footage of facilities that are maintained, a 7% increase in head count, 15% increase in faculty. So while the expenditures have grown, it has been at a rate of growth equal to or less than the growth in our programming. One of our primary expense factors in the budget, as we know, is compensation. Over the last 8 years, we have averaged in our compensation pool increases in the 2 to 2.5% range. The decision on what level of increase to implement is influenced by a number of considerations, including market competition for new hires and retention, as well as the inflation rates our employees are facing. The total cost of compensation, in addition to pay rate, is also influenced by the number of employees we have and the increase in our growing health benefit costs in particular. At this point, we're estimating an increase in fringe costs for our state and tuition-funded employees for FY21 of $10 million. That is without any salary increase. So if you add a 1% increase on top of that, it's another $12.8 million. So to implement a 1% salary increase in our state and tuition funds, it will cost us $22.8 million. An additional $21 million in all of our other funds. A second significant category of spending is always related to facilities and technologies. These are driven by different things, but we can estimate some of our required obligations in this area that you see here. Utilities, we're estimating a $2 million cost increase for next year. For new building operations and debt service, it's just over $2 million for next year. In the technology licensing and maintenance area, that generally comes in the $500,000 to $1.5 million increase per year. So we put that in at $1 million. And of course, we can choose to invest more on top of these required obligations if we wanted to put more money into recurring R&R, for example, or into cybersecurity. Those would be considered investments. Finally, as part of the budget process, we have to make decisions about how best to address the operating needs of our units as well as strategic initiatives. The challenges and opportunities we discuss vary by unit every year. There's always wonderful ideas that are dependent, however, on our changing environment and on programmatic goals and priorities of the university. There are never enough resources to do what we want to do, so the budget process involves making a decision about how much to plan for these types of investments. In most years, planning between $10 and $20 million for this category would allow us for addressing just the very highest priorities. While we have to ask questions about where the additional resources will come from to address all these, it is apparent that we have been controlling our overall cost growth at the same time. I think that is most evident when you think about the chart I talked through just a moment ago that shows the average annual growth in expenditures in our state and tuition funds of just 0.1% overall. The types of things we have implemented and continue to pursue to stabilize or lower costs are identified in this box. Both at the unit and the university level, we're constantly looking for ways to achieve these types of changes to offset our significant cost challenges, as well as to lessen pressure on revenue generation. There's 4 main types of resource planning items that we want to talk about in terms of the budget framework. The first being the state appropriation at $694.1 million this year. Without adjusting for inflation, we are about $15 million below where compared to our peak support year, which was 2008 at $708.8 million. If you factor in inflation, we're $137 million below what the buying power would be of that highest level of support. As you recall from this last spring, the FY21 appropriation in law increases just $1.7 million over the current year. The budget that you approved for FY20 included a plan to hold $8 million of this year's appropriation for use next year. So we have done that. So we can plan around a $9.7 million increase in state appropriation recurring for FY21. 2020 is not an operating budget year at the state, so we have to just plan for that $9.7 million unless the state would entertain a supplemental request and we would be successful in getting that. It's also important to note that about $93 million of the state appropriation is in the form of a restricted state special, which means that we cannot move it throughout the institution. It's required to go to specific places in the university. In terms of tuition, I'm going to skip this as the estimate for the current year at $973 million, and I'm going to move right to the tuition as you want to think about it moving into FY21. Tuition revenue is impacted by a variety of things. It's obviously impacted by the tuition rate, by enrollment, by course registrations or the number of credits that students take, by the mix of students, resident versus non, graduate versus undergraduate, the portion of students eligible for different kinds of waivers, and actually even the throughput. All else being equal, as our graduation rate goes up, our enrollment and our tuition revenue goes down. It's the mix of all of those things that creates a tuition revenue amount. Our best estimate, using trend data at the college level and campus level, as well as an assumption of stable enrollment, would lead to what you see here, which is a 1% increase would generate $9.5 million in new tuition revenue for FY21. We have not backed into a tuition rate for any group of students by deciding on what to spend first and then backfilling or filling the gap after applying the state appropriation and reallocation. Instead, we have continued to make planful decisions in combination with all the variables we're talking about here today on the tuition rate that we want to apply. The third resource category we wanted to summarize just real briefly, we have been calling reallocation in recent years. This is our internal practice of finding efficiencies or purposely reducing or eliminating expenditures in order to reinvest existing resources in new things. The planned amount of internal reinvestment of existing resources as included in the budgets the board has approved over the last several years, where you see back to FY12, is shown in the chart here. It has varied from a high of 3% of our state and appropriation and tuition funds in FY12 to a low of 0.3% the next year. But in the last several years, we've ranged in the 1 to 2% every year. While some level of annual reallocation is essential, actually every year, it's acceptable, it's expected. At some point, the significance of that activity can and will lead to reductions in service levels, productivity, and quality of program outcomes. The process of deciding how best and where to implement expenditure reductions is always aided by clear direction from leadership on which activities are priorities and which are not. Finally, we wanted to say just a few things about the non-framework revenues, the other revenues of the institution, and how they fit in. Sorry.
Thank you, Associate Vice President Tots. I think this is an important chart, particularly we showed this to the new regents that were recently elected, but I think just again, we hear a lot of comments about developing other sources of revenue. And I think this chart is pretty important to note that the state appropriation was 39% of this institution's revenue as late as 1989. This year it's 18%. And that's still high compared to a number of our peers. We have obviously become more tuition dependent, as you can see with the gold bar. We are more tuition dependent than we've ever been in the history of the school. We've done a good job. I mean, our faculty and others have done a tremendous job of increasing the other revenues of the institution from what was 49% back in 1989 to now 57, closing in on 60%. So when I hear the comments about developing other sources of revenue, this is pretty important to understand for members of the board that we have been developing other sources of revenue. Does it come with the same ability to maneuver like framework revenues? No, and we've explained that to you as well. But I think this is an important chart to, again, see how fundamentally the shift in revenues have changed for this institution over the last 30 years.
And for the current year, to break that out a little bit, we are estimating $2.2 billion this year in those other funds. You can see by the red, yellow, and green color scheme here, the red funds are restricted to purpose or to unit, the largest there being the sponsored grants that support primarily our research mission, but also some of our outreach and public service mission as well. The contracts, federal appropriations, gifts and endowment income and so forth, those are restricted. They do on occasion help us free up and take some pressure off the tuition and state appropriation funds. An example of that would be if we're able to hire new faculty from a new endowed chair, for example. That is a way it can help, but we look for those opportunities all the time, but it is rare and not significant in terms of our overall budget. The yellow I won't go into, those are the auxiliary funds, the businesses of the institution, bookstore, parking, and so forth. They generate funds to cover their costs as well as provide some overhead back to the institution. And then the green are unrestricted funds in the units. The challenge there is that there is unequal ability in the units to actually engage in activities that generate those funds. So we, again, look for opportunities for that to happen, but it is on the margins and it is spread differentially throughout the institution. Before we turn to a discussion of these variables or any questions you might have at this point, we wanted to finish with just some reminders about how these variables come into play in the budget process itself. The president is the person that decides how to build these variables into the recommended operating budget you will see in the spring. Through consultation and analysis, she will build a recommended budget incorporating decisions on compensation, tuition rates, investments, and so forth. To get to those recommendations, there is an internal process that involves the chancellors, deans, and vice presidents, relying on them to build budget responses that directly correspond to their unit level and university level strategies and priorities. They're also responsible for identifying financial challenges for their units and potential solutions in partnership with the university. And they are expected to continuously look for and implement process and structure changes that increase efficiencies or recommend changes in scope or activities in order to reduce current expenditures to allow for reinvestment in higher priorities. It's a very distributed budget management process. The end result is achieved as we make a multitude of decisions at the unit level to make them as successful as we possibly can within the constraint of delivering to you a balanced budget when we add it all up. The process to arrive at that point actually begins with this conversation here. The discussion today can inform the president's decisions on how to bring these different variables together in a way that leads to a balanced budget and addresses our goals and priorities. The change in our available resources must be equal to or greater than the change in our costs and investments. It's pretty simple math in that regard.
And that leads us to the intended discussion for today. Regent McMillan and members providing input related to the variables we just outlined, perhaps answering some questions as we've summarized. I know we're short on time, but this concludes our presentation. These are the things we're thinking about this earlier on the FY21 budget. Thank you.
All right, thank you, first of all, for your flexibility and your ability to be concise and to pack a lot of information into a short period of time and deal with our time constraints that are arising from the extra time we took on Murphy, which is important. So I appreciate that very much, and I know the board does too. Secondly, I think this is, for those of you new to the board or those that have been here a while, we're getting the opportunity to understand the input into the critical fiscal decisions we make far earlier than I don't ever remember a discussion where we've got a framework around the tuition implications as early as October. So I think that's just good. And again, thank you to the leadership team for continuing to drive that. That's something that we've been after for a long time. Here we are in October. We don't have decisions to make till next May, and we can already start to provide input and spend time on these matters ourselves. And lastly, I would remind the board, again, time constraints driving this is an opening conversation with a full intent to return in depth with this exact same slide in December. So I'm going to call on, I've got 3 regents that looks like 4 or 5. Please just provide early input here. If you've got a specific question, let's get it teed up. Even if we don't get it answered today, give the administration an opportunity to find answers and to refine their data as we approach the December conversation. So a couple of you raised your hands after my opening comments, after Vice Provost McMaster finished, and then a couple more since. So I've got Regent Beeson, Regent Swigum, Regent Kenyanya, Regent Shu, and Regent Simonson. And again, we need to keep moving here, so I'm going to take them in that order, and please be concise. Thank you. Regent Beeson.
Thank you, presenters. Is Vice Provost McMaster still here? If he would come up for a question, please. The Vice Provost and I have been around here. You've been here longer than I have, but we've both been here over the course of the 5 years. I'm going to say that you were skeptical or maybe skittish about the board's plan to move as aggressively as it did on NR. And I would submit, I'll let you characterize what your opinion was then, but we have increased the net revenue number $32 million over 5 years. So would you characterize that as a financial success, Vice Provost?
Vice Provost McMaster, chance to characterize your thoughts here.
Chair McMillan and Regent Beeson, I think I know the answer you want to hear. I certainly wouldn't call it a failure. Yes, it's been a success.
Thank you. Vice Provost, what would residents be paying today had we not moved ahead? What would their increase be higher today than otherwise?
Non-residents?
For residents, what would they be paying if we weren't able to extract this new revenue from non-residents? 5 or 6% higher, would you say?
I really don't know.
Assistant Vice President.
Mr. Chair, members, each on the Twin Cities campus, I believe each 1% raises about $3 million.
If I can, Mr. Chairman.
Senior Vice President Burnett, you seem to have
It's
done
in the
that.
slide back here, 3.2 million, so
Yeah.
32 million. It would be a 10% increase on
10%.
residents would
Okay.
equal that. Yeah.
I just want that for the record. And then finally, we've decreased the number of reciprocity students from Wisconsin. And do you know where the numbers are in terms of Minnesotans admitted to Madison? Are they? There's been a sort of a lack of parity over the years where they've been decreasing, we've been increasing, now we're decreasing. You and I have talked about this a little before.
Yes. Chairman
Vice Provost McMaster.
Regent Beeson. Several years ago, we actually had leveled the playing field, and there were basically equal numbers of Minnesota students going to Madison as Wisconsin students coming to the Twin Cities. Over the last year or two, there's been another slight uptick with Minnesota residents going to Madison. And so the balance of trade is a bit more in their favor, a bit more over the last 1 or 2 years.
Thank you. I'm not suggesting we impose, Mr. Chair, any tariffs, but I just want to have that for the record that I'm watching those trends.
Well, I think in all,
Here and there.
thank you, Regent Beeson. In all seriousness, the ins and outs of the reciprocity rules and the rules of the road and the opportunities we have to influence that remain of high interest to the board. And as the administration refines its thinking, that's always a place where you'll find interest. Regent Swigum.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I first want to recognize, I think, a point made by Mr. Burnett that we're actually in a transition budget. Members, 2021, there is so much in place, whether it be the legislative appropriation, whatever. This is the next upcoming budget is not necessarily President Gable's budget. It's very, very much a transition budget, and I think we should recognize that. Second of all, as we look at this 2021 budget in a big picture from the 10,000-foot level, where I like to deal with, I think our job is we've got about $9.7 million available for approximate, depending upon what our negotiations are with unions and stuff, increasing costs somewhere between $40 and $50 million. When you include the technology, the facility costs, and most importantly, the compensation costs, that's the biggest part of it. We're somewhere between 40 and 50, maybe the higher end of that. So folks, what we're dealing with and what Brian has to bring us is a budget that tries to close that $40 million gap, is how I'm going to portray it. Question regarding NRNR, and I think I'm piling on what my friend Regent Beeson stated. But last December it was, you brought to us, before we did the budget for 2020, you brought to us the proposed increase in NRNR, I think was 15%, was that, my memory tells me. Did we do it just for that 10? We reduced it to 10.
10.
Okay, it was 15 originally.
The previous year, too.
Okay, and then we reduced it to 10. May I ask, do you plan, was that an increase just one time, or had we done it prospectively into the future? Are you planning to come forward to us in December addressing NRNR like you did last December as we start to build the budget?
Senior Vice President Burnett, maybe you want to field that.
Regent Swigum, if I can, members of the board, we're still in discussions with President Gable about that. What I would say is we feel like we've met the board's policy target getting to the middle of the Big Ten. The question is, we probably don't need to be double digit to stay in the median of the Big Ten publics.
Okay.
So that's a lever we have to talk about. And given that this is a transition budget, I don't know that we're prepared today to talk about an NRNR recommendation at this point, but I would suggest that I don't think we're leaning towards another double-digit tuition increase being recommended, but we just are starting to put this together.
So to clarify, Mr.
Yes,
Chairman,
Regent Swigum.
Vice President Burnett, you might not be coming forward to us with President Gable's recommendation for an NRNR increase, whether it be 2 or 4 or 10 or 0 or whatever in December as you build the budget like we did last year.
Senior Vice President Burnett.
That is that is exactly correct.
Okay. And then, Mr. Chairman, just very quickly, because I know you're in time frame too, to build upon what my friend Regent Beeson said about the NRNR responsibilities and the accountability and where the costs lay. I just happened to notice in the regional recruitment feedback out of Illinois, I think we have a student representative from Illinois here. It says here, multiple school counselors commented to me about how generous we used to be, and now we give less. And that comment tells me, now not looking at it from an Illinois parent standpoint, but the comment tells me that in the past, the generous has been at the expense of Minnesota taxpayers or Minnesota students, or at least Minnesota and reciprocity students. So, I mean, if we've been generous in the past, it's been on the backs of Minnesota students or Minnesota taxpayers and families. That's all I need.
Thank you, Regent Swigum. Regent Kenyanya.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Following that same path, my comment is on NR, more of a comment than a question. On slide 70 that we skipped over because of time. Obviously, sorry for truncating your presentation. One of the stated goals of NR tuition strategy is pricing that more closely represents reputation of the university compared to peer institutions. And on slide 74, we have some student feedback from the CERU, and I'm just going to read an excerpt from one of those students. I don't understand the need to be competitive with other Big Ten schools. And so my comment is really on messaging. I remember in the 16-17 school year, when I was a student rep, I think I said this exact same comment. Regent Beeson, you were chair of that committee then. Obviously, my charge is different now, right? And with more information and looking at it differently, I understand some of the reasons why we raise NR, specifically as how it relates to in-state tuition, right? And I think when you talk to people about tuition, when you talk to them about that, they can reason with you. When you talk to them about cost-driven decisions, people can understand that. But from my experience from when I was a student and from speaking with others, the Big Ten messaging is infuriating to people. It's a bit tone deaf. And I just think that obviously that's not what our strategy is based off of, but for whatever reason, that's what the conversation ends up being based off of. That's what you'll see in articles, and that's what students will talk about. So there's definitely a method to the madness, and it's not, sorry to call it madness, but there's a strategy here, and I'm starting to understand it. But that whole thing where we talk about middle of the Big Ten, it's hard for a parent to understand, well, why do we need to be in the middle of the Big Ten? So I would just say that maybe that's not how we lead or focus our conversations on NR.
Good feedback. Thank you, Regent Kenyanya. Regent Shu. And again, everybody, please keep moving.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair McMillan. I would say, well, just to answer the question, Regent Kenyanya, the reason we talk about it is because that's the peer group that we've defined for ourselves. And, we have different peer groups for different types of purposes, but this is the one that we've always compared to. I would say, I, as being one of the people who has pushed hard for the increase of NR&R, I think we're getting close to the end, meaning the middle of the pack. But if you look at who's above us, I think we're better than Michigan State. I think we're better than Wisconsin. I think we're better than Maryland. I think we're better than Indiana. I think we're better than Penn State, but we charge a lot less. So I would say the number that I would be looking at, and the number I've always looked at, is about 36,000, which would be another increase of $2,500, which should put us around the 7.5 to 8% increase for this year. And I think that's reasonable based on what everybody else is, where everybody else is at. And I agree with Regent Swigman. I mean, we have a seriously high in-state tuition compared to Wisconsin or in Iowa or Nebraska even. They're low on everything. But seeing as though we started at 13 on the NR&R and now we're 7 or 8, I think that's pretty good. And the numbers are still there. And I think I wasn't in the room, but I was in the back, and I heard that we have the largest international class, which is phenomenal. And I'd like to see a breakdown of that, but that's another story. So I would like to see the in-state, because the in-state students have really been subsidizing the low NR&R that we had since around 2008, where we had the R plus, resident plus 4,000 model. And obviously we're up from that, but I still think that we should be helping the in-state students a little bit by either freezing or even lowering tuition by a percentage point or two. And I think that's certainly possible. I'd also like to see more in-state students and more students, period. I think we still have room. We have 45 to 50,000 applications a year. We enroll about 6,000, but we could enroll more. And I think that, we're leaving money on the table any way we look at it. So I would continue in the direction that we're moving in, with the exception of having a freeze or decrease on in-state tuition.
Thank you, Regent Shu. Regent Simonson.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. Just a couple of comments and maybe a question for President Gable. I've been at this about a year and a half on the board. One of the first things I had to look at was the two-year budget of $4.2 billion, I think it was, and looking at the breakdown on that, about 26% of it was tuition, and then other revenues were about 7%, and I was surprised at that. I was interested in when I looked at that, and I think I got my facts right. And then looking at the state revenue, why that revenue has gone down, talking to different legislators, administration expenses questions. Some of them talked to me about lack of transparency, that kind of thing, the confidence in that. But what I'm really interested in, and going to President Gable, is looking harder at alternative sources of revenue. I'd like that 7% to go up, the 25% to go down. So I was interested in the paper the other day. I'm sure you all read our Honeycrisp technology. It's been out for, 15 years, something like that. And it's the third highest revenue generator. 15 years, $18 million. Now, $18 million may seem like a lot, but for the third highest generating technology coming out of the university, to me, it's nothing. And the second highest is a PRRS vaccine, or PRRS virus for swine. And even that wasn't very high. So so my question to President Gable is, I hope we're looking at, in your strategic planning, a longer term revenue producer other than tuition, more specifically. And I think it would also help with the legislature if they saw that. I'm not for raising tuition.
President Gable.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Regent Simonson, yes, as you know, you and I have talked about this at length and with some of the members of the board, and I'm happy to say to everybody that this is part of the strategic planning process. There are, in the sort of dichotomous way of putting these phrases together, traditional sources of alternative revenue, like you described, revenue off of innovation. We'll hear about some of that from Vice President Kramer tomorrow and some of his plans there. And I know we've heard some from him about this already. And then there are other non-traditional sources of alternative revenue, keeping in mind that alternative revenue by its very nature is somewhat non-traditional, at least compared to how we've done things in the past, that you'll also be seeing us explore and look into. Setting targets around that is part of what we expect the strategic planning process to include, with proposals that come up depending on the nature of those proposals, either for faculty approval with student and staff consultation or for approval by the board if they're of the contractual nature that we would normally bring forward. But yes, absolutely, this is part of our forward-looking strategy.
Thank you, President Gable. Regent Rocha, and then both student representatives like to speak. We are desperately behind time, so quickly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I echo the chair's comments about thank you for this level of dialogue at this point. It is such a vast change, and I think it's going to serve the board and the administration well in being very deliberate in how we proceed with this. I want to just talk briefly on the tuition issue, which I know isn't the full conversation here, but in response to my colleague, Regent Kenyanya's question, when you generally approach tuition at a public institution, a publicly supported land-grant university, for Minnesota students, the issue is trying to provide access, is keeping tuition at that level. So there's this desire, as you can hear from other members of the board, to keep tuition down, to maximize that access. And for students that are outside of the state who are theoretically not to be subsidized by the state's contributions, it's about market. And so when we talk about the Big Ten, that ultimately ends up being a bit of a proxy for market. I would say when you look at where we are right now, Vice President Burnett, we are in a much, much better position to look at, at this point, where do we want to go? Because you can see the states, most of the states that are below us now are states that have serious population questions and concerns. Now, I don't necessarily think that they're going to achieve the goal, but they've obviously taken a low-cost perspective in order to try to lure folks to their state, and then I'm, interested to see how many people actually stay into their states, but we're now in a better position considering where we are. We're actually fortunate in the Big Ten among these states as far as having modest growth in our student population. And obviously, when we look at students from outside of the state that come in and we're pricing at market, the vast majority don't even fill out a FAFSA. So need is not a primary consideration nearly to the extent that it would be for resident students. And there's a whole history of Wisconsin and how Wisconsin kids used to pay less to come here than Minnesota kids did to go there. And when that was equalized, we saw this major migration of students to our benefit. But I would just point out that when we look at all these things on the slide in front of us, which I think is just a wonderful starting point, these really fall under what ultimately this conversation is really a mini strategic plan. And I'm really looking forward to having that strategic plan to help us. And hopefully, we're kind of getting this intersection of that dialogue because we have to look and say, what type of institution do we want to be? Certainly when you look at where we are priced market for NRNR, our aspirational peers tend to have higher NRNR tuition, and it tends to reflect to the public as being an indicator of higher quality. So that's pushing on us. But at the same time, we want to ensure that we are attracting students and not frightening them off before they even come in. So that's an important dialogue. We also, when we talk about compensation strategy, we have to ask ourselves, what kind of relationship do we want with the general public? What kind of relationship do we want with the legislature? These are important conversations that we have not just for this budget, but as we look at where we are as an institution going forward. I would say this, as we go forward in this dialogue on this budget and with respect to the strategic plan, we are in a really good spot. We provide the product that the majority of students coming out today want. Other institutions aren't quite so fortunate. And I think some of those institutions, public, some private, there are going to be consolidations and some may cease to operate. We may, in dialogue with state leaders and other education leaders, identify that maybe we need some growth because we are going to be fulfilling an interest. When you look at the number of students Iowa produces between Iowa State and Iowa, and the kind of education students are going there, and a lot, huge numbers from outside their state, including huge numbers of Minnesota students, we may have an opportunity to meet some of that market demand, and at the same time engage in, enjoy some efficiencies that make it more accessible and affordable to Minnesota students and still maintain high quality. Just want to lay that out there as we go into this conversation, but thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Regent Rocha. All right, I'm going to give both our student representatives a very brief opportunity to comment here, knowing that we're coming back in December. We'll start with you, Student Representative King.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. Thank you, presenters. Just looking at the numbers for incoming NRNR students, we actually went down 117 students from the previous year, but we did raise our revenue from that, which is great. But we're also looking at trying to retain our students in the future. If we continue raising it, one of our students already, from the feedback that we had gotten in point number 2, they said that they came here and they already considered other higher universities. They picked this because this was more affordable, but if we continue raising their rates, is that going to still be the case? Is that going to still be a way to look at it, or are they going to start to look at other universities due to the impact that they're going to have in the future and the unexpected increase to their tuitions that they didn't plan on before they chose here?
Thank you, Student Representative Kahane.
Thank you, Chair McMillan, presenters. As someone who attended the university for the first time as a non-resident student, I came from Illinois, and I chose the university as an undergraduate because we had a robust economics program. I didn't end up finishing in economics, but that's a funny story for later. I certainly would never have considered the University of Minnesota if a 15% increase in non-resident tuition were even peripherally on the horizon. This is something that I think impacts our ability to retain out-of-state, not so much necessarily attract, but retain students that we already have. Certainly, I think this could be severely detrimental. I don't think that increasing tuition for out-of-state students is as viable a solution for our budgetary needs as for example, what Regent Simonson says about our Honeycrisp apples are a huge source of revenue. But I seem to recall actually just yesterday looking up some statistics on this, and I think that we get $1 for every tree that we sell. And that seems really egregiously low for something that's so delicious. I'm sure that we all love Honeycrisp apples. And perhaps if we could, I don't know, maybe get a penny for every apple sold and as well, we could avoid raising tuition for anybody. I'm not super well apprised of these matters, but thank you.
Thank you. We move on to the consent report, and that's before you. And if anyone has an item in the consent report they'd like treated independently, please let me know now. Otherwise, I'd entertain a motion to approve the consent report. Is there a motion?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Any discussion on the matters before us in the consent report? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Vice President Burnett, any information items to call up for us before we move on to close the meeting to discuss a real estate transaction?
No, Mr. Chairman, just a real estate report, and we've heard about real estate a lot today, so there's a little bit in there for you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Item 8 on our agenda, and the final matter before us today is a real estate matter, and the open meeting law in Minnesota allows the board to close certain meetings, but requires that before we do so, we state the specific grounds permitting the meeting to be closed and describe the subject to be discussed. The specific grounds here are to develop or consider offers for the sale of real property. The address of the property is included in the resolution. I'd like to note that this meeting will be audio recorded and will be made available to the public after all property discussed at the meeting has been sold or the board has abandoned the transaction. I'm now going to ask Mr. Langworthy to read the resolution in our docket and then seek a motion in a second. Mr. Langworthy.
Resolution to conduct non-public meetings of the Finance and Operations Committee to develop or consider offers for the purchase or sale of real property. Whereas, based on advice of the General Counsel, the Board of Regents has balanced the purposes served by the open meeting law and determined that there is a need to review confidential or protected non-public real estate data involving the University of Minnesota. Now, therefore, be it resolved that in accordance with Minnesota statutes sections 13D.01 subdivision 3 and 13D.05 subdivision 3C, a non-public meeting of the Finance and Operations Committee be held on Thursday, October 10th, 2019 in the boardroom, 600 McNamara Alumni Center for the purpose of developing or considering offers or counteroffers for the sale of the following real property: 250 to 300 acres at Umore Park for light industrial commercial development, bounded by Audrey Avenue to the west, Lane Avenue to the east, and County Road 42 to the north.
All right, is there a motion to adopt that resolution?
So moved.
And a second? Discussion on the motion to close the meeting. All right, all in favor? Aye?
Aye.
All right, we stand closed at this point, and I'd like to remind everyone that the meeting is being audio recorded as required under the open meeting law, and the recording will be made available to the public after all the property has been sold or the board has abandoned the transaction. The open meeting law also states that the real property that is subject to the closed meeting must be specifically identified. Mr. Langworthy just did that, so I won't reread that. And finally, a list of all the regents and other persons present at the meeting will be made available to the public as well.
1 second.
Yes, and we'll now take a brief pause while we're certain that we've closed the communication links.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
In a non, I think, divulging fashion, I'm our representative to the Foundation Audit Committee meeting, which is starts in 7 minutes downstairs. So once you've confirmed that we're now secure, if I could just make a comment.